Karen and the HOA's attempts at control had now escalated beyond the bounds of reason or jurisdiction. They claimed the authority to penalize me for a lodge I had purchased entirely outside their area of governance. According to their letters, notices, and threats, I was violating HOA codes, zoning ordinances, and community ethics, as interpreted entirely by them. But the truth was clear. The lodge was my property, legally acquired, and beyond the reach of their arbitrary rules. The notices arrived simultaneously via mail, email, and hand delivery, each more audacious than the last. One demanded immediate payment of fines, the other threatened legal action, and a third implied that law enforcement might intervene. Karen, predictably, was at the forefront, publicly claiming that the lodge's existence undermined community standards. The audacity of her reach was staggering. I responded in a manner consistent with every prior confrontation, methodically, legally, and strategically. First, I documented the location, purchase agreements, deeds, and all relevant correspondence to establish absolute clarity of ownership. Then, I reviewed all alleged violations the HOA claimed, cross-referencing them with municipal, county, and state statutes. It became immediately obvious that not only did their claims lack merit, they were entirely without jurisdiction. The real power move, however, came in the form of preemptive legal action. I retained counsel specializing in property law and HOA disputes, instructing them to file suit not only to dismiss the fines and threats, but also to initiate judicial review of the HOA's governance practices. The aim was clear: to expose the overreach, document the pattern of harassment, and ensure that any future actions by Karen or the HOA would be met with enforceable legal consequences. Karen, as usual, reacted with a mixture of outrage and desperation. She attempted to rally support from the HOA board, calling emergency meetings and issuing dramatic public statements about protecting the community. But the documentation, legal filings, and prior incidents had already shifted public perception. Neighbors, once hesitant to question her authority, began to openly challenge her, citing the same legal records and deeds I had presented. The judicial proceedings that followed were decisive. Each claim the HOA had made against my lodge was systematically dismissed. Evidence of harassment, false claims, and repeated attempts to assert authority where none existed was presented clearly. Judges and attorneys alike noted the pattern. Karen and her associates had repeatedly attempted to control property, intimidate residents, and fabricate claims to force compliance with their whims. By the end of the proceedings, the HOA leaders themselves found themselves under scrutiny for overreach, procedural violations, and potential exposure to civil liability. Karen's credibility had eroded entirely, and her ability to enforce arbitrary rules was legally nullified. My lodge remained untouched, fully operational, and entirely under my control, while the HOA's attempted penalties became a documented example of failure, misjudgment, and overreach. The community took note. Where once there had been fear, now there was clarity. Legal preparation, documentation, and strategic action could neutralize the most audacious claims. Karen's repeated attempts to impose fines and enforce arbitrary rules were now public record, demonstrating her obsession, recklessness, and inability to act within the law. This victory was more than just retaining control over the lodge. It was a turning point. The HOA had gone from asserting minor irritations to attempting full-scale legal harassment, and each attempt had been neutralized and exposed. Karen's repeated failures reinforced a critical principle: audacity without authority and intimidation without legal grounding will always be overcome by preparation, knowledge, and measured strategy. By the time the courthouse doors closed, my lodge was secure. The HOA was in judicial proceedings over their own misconduct, and Karen's influence had been irreparably diminished. Once again, preparation, law, and foresight had triumphed over entitlement, audacity, and recklessness.